shimmering turquoise of the Caribbean Sea might mislead you, but in the early 18th century, Nassau bore a very different face. It was a capital of what historians call a republic of pirates. From roughly 1706 to 1718, this ragtag confederation of privateers turned outlaws seized control of New Providence and ran it under their own ominous yet strangely egalitarian code. This was at a time when the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, a massive continental conflict triggered by the death of the childless Spanish Habsburg monarch Charles II, fundamentally altered territorial control, colonial influence, and European diplomacy, especially strengthening Britain's overseas and naval position. Particularly when peace treaties were signed in 1714, many privateers lost their commissions and employment. Numerous trained sailors, familiar with combat, drifted into piracy. Nassau wasn't a republic in any legal or diplomatic sense. There was no crown making treaties, no recognized constitution. What it was rather was a zone of self-governance carved out in the void of colonial administration, an experiment in pirate sovereignty. The locals and colonial powers had retreated in the face of repeated Franco-Spanish assaults, such as those in 1703 and 1706. As the official English presence faltered, pirate crews flooded in, claiming Nassau for themselves. The roots of this pirate republic can be traced back to a single audacious move by Henry Avery in 1696. Avery sailed his prize, the Fancy, into Nassau's harbor, its hold packed with gold, silver, ivory, and gunpowder, and bribed the colonial governor to look the other way. That moment, weaving illicit loot with corrupt diplomacy, set a precedent. Nassau became a safe haven. Over time, the lines between privateering and piracy blurred. After the War of the Spanish Succession ended, many privateers lost their legal commissions and turned to open piracy. They brought with them a culture of shipboard discipline, naval strategy, and maritime codes, all of which they adapted in this new, lawless enclave. Pirates like Benjamin Hornigold, Edward Teach, Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Rackham, and others came to Nassau, drawn by its freedom from oversight. Hornigold famously declared Nassau a pirate's republic, giving Teach command of a fast sloop, and as their ranks swelled, the pirate populace overtook the few hundred law-abiding settlers. In those years, Nassau truly became more than a pirate base. It was a beating heart of the Flying Gang, an alliance of pirate crews each bound by their own codes, a loose confederation of maritime outlaws rather than a formal state. And so Nassau stood, not as a principled republic born of Enlightenment ideals, but as a pragmatic, chaotic, and in many ways revolutionary zone of autonomous rule, where the laws of kings held little sway and the pirate code reigned supreme. When you imagine a pirate ship in the early 18th century, you might picture chaos, bloodshed, and ruthless captains ruling with iron fists. But the reality that unfolded in places like Nassau's pirate haven was far more subtle, more paradoxical, and much more organized. Underneath the black flags, pirates engineered a governance structure suffused with tension between tyranny and democracy, between order and rebellion. To understand how the pirate republic worked, one must dive into mechanics of shipboard power, the binding force of pirate constitutions, and the checks and balances that restrained the most ambitious captain. Pirates needed cooperation as much as they needed cutlasses. They had no external legal authority to enforce loyalty, so they built it themselves. As Peter Leeson argues in his foundational work in Archai, pirate crews devised two complementary institutions, a set of checks and balances to curb captain predation, and what he calls democratic constitutions to channel conflict into rules rather than mutiny. On almost every pirate ship, before setting sail, the crew would draft articles of agreement, a compact that read like a mini constitution. These articles codified how loot was divided, what punishments awaited those who broke rules, and how officers were elected or deposed. Crucially, they were ratified by unanimous or broad consent of the crew. As Stephen Berlin Johnson puts it, every man shall have an equal vote in the affairs of moment. These agreements turned power from an uncontested prerogative into a fragile trust, enforceable by the threat of exclusion, exile, or worse. But to call pirate society a pure democracy would be misleading. Authority was never entirely flattened. Captains held real command, especially during battle or in emergencies. Yet even then, their power was circumscribed. Outside combat, much of the day-to-day running fell to quartermaster, a second-elected officer whose job was to manage supplies, adjudicate disputes, distribute spoils, and check the captain's authority. In some accounts, the captain could do nothing of significance without the quartermaster's assent. This separation of authority looked uncannily like a rudimentary separation of powers centuries before Montesquieu. Hierarchy in pirate society existed, but it was a hierarchical democracy, not a feudal tyranny. Formal roles, captain, quartermaster, boatswain, surgeon, existed, but the power these roles held was tethered by the articles. Piratical governance was intentionally flat compared to contemporary naval or merchant vessels, where officers commanded absolute authority over crews living in fear of punishment. The pirates' codification of rules was itself a governance mechanism. It prevented internal predation by leaders, guided incentives, and mitigated discord. The checks on the captain were real. If a captain acted recklessly or selfishly, diverting treasure, risking the ship, or violating agreed norms, the crew could recall him, depose him by vote, or strip his privileges. The quartermaster might step in as a counterbalance. Crew could contest his decisions. It was not a perfect system, but it was self-enforcing, built into the social logic of pirate life. The pirates could not rely on courts. They could not rely on governments. They relied on their own internal system of incentives and sanction. In practice, these mechanisms transformed ships into floating mini-states with surprisingly stable governance. Pirates didn't just plunder. They legislated, they adjudicated, they policed themselves. The balance was delicate. One misstep, one captain too arrogant, and the crew might cast him off onto a skiff in the middle of the sea. But for a time, these precarious systems held. This strange synergy of hierarchy bound by democracy, of tyranny checked by constitution, of power limited by consent, defined how Nassau's pirate community functioned. It gave them not just ferocity, but cohesion, not just lawlessness, but rule. And in that paradox lay the secret of their fleeting power. The seas that bore Nassau's pirate republic were not just places of plunder and violence. Beneath the black flag, something remarkable stirred, a social experiment in equality, justice, and survival. In the crucible of danger, pirate crews devised a fragile but potent social order. They realized that without rules, every mutiny or dispute would tear their fragile fleet apart. So they turned to the Articles of Agreement, a bespoke constitution for lawless men, not merely to demand obedience, but to bind themselves with mutual obligation. When a pirate vessel put to sea, the crew gathered to draft and sign these articles. Even before one shot was fired, each man declared his consent, sometimes swearing on a Bible, sometimes on swords, axes, or even skulls, whatever artifact lay at hand. These articles did more than proclaim intent. They laid out the rules of engagement, who got what share of the loot, how a man was punished for cowardice, stealing, or desertion, how a dispute would be settled. As the New England Pirate Museum codifies, they held that every man had a voice in all affairs. Captain and quartermaster received 2 shares, other officers 1 1/4, crew 1 share. Imagine a cook, a quartermaster, a gunsmith, or a former sailor from Africa. Regardless of background, skin color, or previous status, once he signed the articles, he gained a claim to legitimacy. Of course, women, young boys, or prisoners pressured to join weren't always included, but in the context of the Atlantic in 1710, pirate crews were astonishingly multicultural and relatively egalitarian. Authority was not given by birth, but earned by consensus. That said, such equality existed within bounds. Reputation, experience, reputation for courage, or leadership all shaped informal hierarchies. Discipline was non-negotiable, for the sea brooked no weakness. Violation of the articles meant punishment, marooning, whipping, loss of shares, or death for the gravest offenses. Desertion in battle might mean immediate execution. Violence among crew had to move ashore, often settled in duels at sword or pistol under strict rules. As historian Cindy Valar notes, the punishments for disobedient crew members could range from marooning to execution, but only after due process under the articles. Behind every retribution lay a social contract. The crew was the ultimate arbiter. If a captain ran too far afield or pocketed extra silver, the crew could depose him. The quartermaster often served as a check, carrying the vote of the crew and executing punishments. In fact, pirates had a concept akin to distribution of justice, where captured ships' crews or officers were judged under the same codes. If a captain had treated his sailors cruelly, he risked execution. If he had ruled fairly, he might be freed. Bartholomew Roberts even named George Wilson dispenser justice among his ranks. One captivating custom among pirates was matlowage. 2 seafarers, in effect shipmates, would pledge mutual support, share income, inherit one another's property if one died, and commit to defend one another in battle. Some historians interpret it as a variant of social contract, familial alliance, or even proto-domestic partnership. What emerges from all this is paradoxical yet potent. Pirate crews lived in a realm of extreme violence and risk, and yet they built an internal order rooted not in decrees from above, but in consent from all. They were not utopian. Their justice was harsh, their discipline unyielding, their tolerance limited. But in an age when kings and merchants ruled by birth and decree, pirates aspired, in their own brutal way, to something different, a crew in which every man had a voice, every violation had consequences, and every share was bound by oath. In the violent spray of Atlantic waves, the pirate order was not born from brute force, but from a fragile social compact woven between desperate men. Under the Black Flag, pirates did not abide by the king's law. They created their own. Their survival depended not simply on capturing ships, but on maintaining a functioning community where grievances did not dissolve into endless internal strife. They needed systems, rules, enforcement, and legitimacy. On each voyage, before a gun was raised, the crew gathered to draw up their own articles of agreement. Unlike the naval or merchant vessels of the time, where captains ruled absolutely, pirates required consent. These articles were constitutional contracts each crew member signed, pledging loyalty, adherence, and mutual accountability. They laid out everything from the shares of loot to punishments for infractions, from prohibitions on gambling to stipulations that firearms be kept ready. Many pirate codes forbade damage to the shared stock, hiding the loot, or carelessness with firearms and fire, for obvious reasons aboard wooden hulls. Once signed, the articles had real teeth. A pirate who attempted to bypass them risked loss of share, marooning, or even execution. They were not empty symbols. The threat of social exclusion or violent reprisal kept them credible. The crew, bound by oath, would enforce them themselves. Violations triggered trials aboard ship. A jury of crewmen might judge, and the quartermaster often helped adjudicate. Some ships practiced distribution of justice. After capturing a vessel, crew would question its captain or officers about abuses. If found guilty, they might be executed. If innocent, freed. Bartholomew Roberts' ship had a man named George Wilson as dispenser justice, the ship's internal arbiter. The pirate code also regulated how spoils were divided. The maxim no purchase, no pay, or no prey, no pay, underpinned their economic model. If a raid failed, no one got paid. If it succeeded, the loot was shared under strict ratios. Regular crew members received 1 share. Officers and the captain often got 1.5 to 2 shares, rarely more. This approach was in stark contrast to naval or privateer practice, where captains or ship owners might claim vastly greater portions. Because pirates feared the abuses of unchecked authority, captain predation, as Leeson calls it, much of internal power was checked. In battle, the captain commanded absolute authority. But in day-to-day life, the quartermaster often ruled, distributing provisions, enforcing discipline, adjudicating disagreements, and ensuring the captain did not stray into tyranny. If the captain overreached, the crew could depose him. This division of power resembled checks and balances centuries before Montesquieu would formalize them. This system, where everyone had a voice, where justice was internal, where inequality was tempered, was far from perfect. Disputes, mutiny, or violence could still erupt. Women and certain coerced members might not always be included. Status, reputation, skill played a role in influence. Yet, for its time and place, it was revolutionary, a self-administered society of outlaws under rule, not chaos. In the end, pirate communities in Nassau and beyond didn't reject order. They reinvented it. They insisted that even in lawlessness, governance must be just and enforceable. And their greatest innovation was not their swords or ships, but their audacity to bind free men to a law they all consented to. In the grand drama of Nassau's pirate republic, the forces that threatened its demise didn't come from within alone. They came from the imperial ambitions of distant crowns, the squadrons of a rising Royal Navy, and the calculated return of British authority. By 1718, the pirate stronghold at New Providence would face its reckoning. And with it, the paradox that a self-styled republic could not withstand the weight of global empire. For more than a decade, Nassau had been the fulcrum of the so-called Republic of Pirates, a de facto base of operations of a flying gang that struck at the very arteries of Atlantic commerce. Pirate crews disrupted trade across the West Indies, and soon the crown was pressured to act. The urgency of protecting merchant vessels, diplomatic ties, and imperial prestige could no longer be ignored. That's when the crown turned to a man who straddled 2 worlds, Woodes Rogers. Former privateer, explorer, investor, and adventurer, Rogers was appointed governor of the Bahamas in 1717 with a mission that mixed state power and private enterprise. His crusade to retake Nassau was financed in part by merchants eager to reclaim safe trading routes, and he would find himself contending equally with pirates and colonial bureaucracy. On July 22, 1718, Rogers arrived at New Providence with 7 tall ships, war vessels, and merchant ships in tow. He blockaded Nassau's harbor, cut off sea lanes, and presented a royal pardon: surrender or face the gallows. The blockade was ruthless and swift. Pirates like Charles Vane tried counterattacks, even deploying a fire ship under cover of darkness to break through the line. But the trap was closing. Inside Nassau, the balance shattered. Many pirates accepted the pardon. Among them was Benjamin Hornigold, once a founding figure of the pirate community, who switched allegiances, turned pirate hunter, and assisted Rogers in restoring order. Others resisted, but the colonial power had the advantage: naval guns, reinforcements, supply chains, and the force of law behind it. The fragile self-governing structures of pirate society, articles, votes, checks on power, were no match for gunboats and proclamations. Rogers then moved to rebuild the infrastructure. He reorganized Nassau under royal governance, recruited settlers, restored defenses, and began reasserting British law across the islands. His first term, however, was financially disastrous. He often found himself in debt as funds from the crown and investors fell short. The pirate republic that had thrived on decentralization, on voluntary allegiance and maritime checks and balances, now confronted an empire that systematically projected force over sea and land. The pirates were cornered. Their strategic depth eroded, their asylum shrinking with every vessel Rogers' fleet brought to bay. By the end of 1719, Rogers had cleared most pirates from the Bahamas, though resistance lingered in remote islands. He died in Nassau in 1732, a testament to how deeply the pirate world had intertwined with colonial politics. In that clash, pirates' voluntary order versus imperial coercion, the Republic of Nassau met its fate. The experiment in maritime self-governance was over. The story of Chapter 5 is not simply one of conquest, but reckoning between two orders, one built from consent at sea, the other imposed from power on land. By 1718, the pirate experiment in self-rule that had held Nassau in its thrall was unraveling. What had begun as a bold experiment in collective governance and maritime autonomy was being strangled by the forces of empire, pragmatism, and shifting allegiances. In this final chapter, we see how the Republic of Pirates met its end, and how its legacy echoed far beyond the Caribbean waves. The collapse began not with a battle of sword alone, but with voices, as Governor Woodes Rogers landed on New Providence with offers of pardon, backed by firepower. Rogers, a former privateer turned colonial governor, arrived in July 1718 commanding a small fleet that would cut off the pirate stronghold and restore the British flag. His mission? Offer clemency to pirates who surrendered under the king's pardon, while hunting down those who refused. The pardon was more than mercy. It was politics. Many pirate captains saw the writing on the wall and accepted. Among them was Benjamin Hornigold, a founding figure of the Nassau Order, who traded his Jolly Roger for a commission under Rogers to hunt his former comrades. Others like Charles Vane resisted, defiantly firing a burning ship at Rogers' fleet in a dramatic nighttime escape. The internal cracks in the pirate polity widened. The very institutions designed to restrain tyranny, votes, elections, disciplinary process, became fragile under pressure. Some pirates accepted the pardon in frustration, fatigue, or fear. Others tried to negotiate exit terms. Francis Leslie, a pirate commander of the Flying Gang, led a coalition that pushed petition Captain Pierce to release Charles Vane as an inducement for mass surrender. Leslie and over 200 pirates accepted the king's pardon. Rogers' arrival and actions were ruthless and symbolic. He executed captured pirates, 8 in December 1718, to demonstrate that the pirate code would no longer protect them. He used ex-pirates as pirate hunters. He re-established British legal structures on the islands, courts, garrisons, royal governance. Within months, the pirate republic was dismantled, and yet, when the republic fell, it left more than charred timber behind. Though the pirate order vanished, its legacy lived on in legend, in theory, and in the imaginations of those who marveled that a band of outlaws had tried to govern themselves. Some historians, like Peter Leeson, treat Nassau's pirates as a case study in an archive, where rational self-interest and institutional incentives substituted for state force. The pirate code, shared loot, elections, and checks on power would become part of modern mythos on consent and governance. Could Nassau's pirate system have been influenced by earlier democratic or quasi-democratic ideas? Perhaps indirectly. The sailors and privateers who entered piracy had observed command structures aboard naval and merchant ships, and had chafed under absolute authority. Their experiences of petition, protest, and cruel voice may have informed their later insistence on mutual consent. Figures like Bartholomew Roberts and other pirate captains popularized the notion that every man has a vote in affairs of moment. These ideas were not direct borrowings from the Enlightenment, but emergent from maritime cultures. In the end, was Nassau a true fledgling democracy? No, not in the modern sense. It was too unstable, too short-lived, too dependent on brute force and charisma. It was more pragmatic than philosophical. Self-administration born necessity in a lawless space created by colonial neglect. But it was also more than chaos. It was a fleeting experiment where pirates granted each other voice, structure constraints, and a shared commitment to order within disorder. As British rule reasserted itself and the pirate ships scattered, a new narrative began, one in which pirates became legends, and the Republic of Nassau became a parable about governance, consent, and the limits of stateless order. The sea forgot many names, but it did not forget that for a dozen years, men dared to question rule from below the waves.